Hello Chesnerites. Blitz battles are always intense, but this one had an extra twist. The loser had to answer one question from the winner under a polygraph test. Hans Niemann and Daniil Dubov faced off in an 18 game over the board blitz showdown filled with tactical fireworks, time scrambles, and high stakes. Who had the upper hand when it mattered the most? Let's break down the biggest moment from this thrilling match. As I mentioned, it's an 18 game match, and this position is from game 13. So, I'll tell you the score till game 12, that was 7.5 versus 4.5 in Dubov's favor. So, 6 games are left, and Niemann is struggling because he's 3 points behind. So, this is the position from game 13, and Niemann has white pieces. So there is material imbalance in this position. So he has these two pass pawns and the bishop for Dubov's rook, but this pawn is blocked. This is a bit too far, and another danger. This pawn is about to fall. So what to do? In case he plays something like bishop b4, then c5 can be played, and this is under pressure. But he played a really strong move in this position, that is h4. Now he's actually attacking Dubov's queen. It may seem like, but is he simply not blundering the pawn? Actually, that's a huge mistake, and Dubov fell into that. So what he could have simply done instead in this position is he could have played this, and after this, so Niemann gets some activity because of this, but once again these are so because of this active rook and this pass pawn is also there, Dubov should not be too difficult for him to hold the game to a draw. But we have to remember, blitz game, time trouble, and there is intense pressure. So Dubov thought, okay, my queen is being attacked, let me just play queen takes e7. This is what Niemann had intended. And then he played the brilliant move, bishop takes g7 check. Because, of course, if queen takes g7, this rook falls. And if king takes g7 in this position, then he had actually planned the lethal queen g4 check. And then rook takes e7 is coming. And then with the queen, with the pass pawn, and then this pawn majority as well, he has great winning chances in this position. So after bishop takes g7 check, Dubov actually played king g8, but bishop e5. Now Niemann is not worried about his material deficit because the g7 pawn is gone, and Dubov's king has gotten extremely weak. And then Dubov played queen f7 check, king g1, rook d6 was played, and then rook g3, king f8, just this. Then centralizing the queen, there are rook f3 type of ideas. There can be this and then rook e3 type of ideas as well. Just exchange everything and then promote. Then king e7 was played, rook g7, and Dubov resigned. So game 13 is over. Niemann won this. So now the deficit has reduced from 3 points to 2. Now let's go for the next game. So in this one, Dubov had white pieces and Niemann was black. Game 14. So let's see what Niemann did. So as we can see, his rook on the open file, queen is also active, this rook also well placed, so he's doing better. But he played a really nice move to increase the advantage even further. He played the move bishop d5, centralizing the bishop with the tempo. By the way, he did not blunder the bishop, because if queen takes d5, then there is queen takes d2, and this queen is in fact overloaded because there was queen b2 and Niemann played queen takes a4. He has won a pawn, he has this great bishop, he has this pass pawn. So let's see how the game went. So Dubov is actually a really resilient player. However the position is, he's going to fight. So just getting clearly better or winning position is not enough. You have to constantly be wary of his tricks and then win the game. So let's see. So now he's pushing the pass pawn. Then he's creating some activity. A4, by the way, not a blunder. Rook takes a4, has bishop b3. So that's the problem. Then rook a1 was played, bishop b3, d7 was played, king f8, king e7, then rook b6, rook d7, then in this position rook b8 was played, then rook c7 was played, bishop f1, rook b7, rook a8. So Niemann is actually trying to stop this pass pawn, rook d8. Now comes a really instructive moment. So Dubov is actually holding on the things together so far. Then after rook b1, actually, Niemann played the move rook d4. It seems like, wait, what? Bishop b3, a takes b3, rook takes b3? Is he actually giving up the pawn? No. He has actually an extremely cunning idea in his mind. That is, if bishop takes b3, then he took this pawn. He's not in a rush to capture this bishop, because in case bishop c2 gets played, then there is rook takes b1, bishop takes b1, rook d1 check, and then he will recover the piece and he will actually end up with 2 extra pawns. So Dubov played rook takes g6. He's like, I'll get the pawn, but Niemann is not worried. And then in this position, he actually found a really nice square for the rook. See, look at the harmony. This rook defends this pawn, this pawn defends this pawn, this pawn defends this rook, and this rook is also putting pressure on this pawn. So now this king is actually not needed on the king side, so it can go to the queen side and then go ahead and the pass pawn can be pushed, and soon Niemann won the game. So game 14 in Niemann's favor. So once again, the 3-point deficit that was there 2 games back, now after this game it is just 1-point deficit. So after 14 games, so Niemann is only behind 1 point. Now let's go for the next game. So here Niemann has white pieces and Dubov is black. So Niemann is in check. So in this position he played the move king d1. Now see, when the stakes are high, when time trouble is there, even the world's strongest can actually make blunders. And this is what happened in Dubov's case. He had to actually find, for a blitz game, a slightly tricky move, that is knight a4. So the point of this move is that he can try to exchange this knights, so that what can happen is this pass pawn can be stopped by the rook, and then he can try to push this pass pawn, and then eventually the game should end in a draw. But it's a bit of a counterintuitive move, because he needs to allow Niemann to queen. And by the way, this is not a problem for him, because there is knight b2 check, king c2, rook takes a8, king takes b2. It's still a draw. Even if these 2 pawns are removed, it's still a draw, because rook and knight versus rook, it's with a good play, white won't be able to win. So after king d1, he had to find the stuffed knight f4 move, and he would be able to hold the game. But he actually played the seemingly natural move, actually, that is knight e4, centralizing the knight. But that's a losing blunder. Rook c4. This knight gets lost with a tempo, and then the game was soon over. And of course, Niemann won. So after 12 games, there was 3-point deficit, but Niemann actually won 3 games in a row. And after 15 games, now the score is equalized, 7.5, 7.5, and the momentum, of course, is on the Niemann side. So now let's see what happens for the last 3 thrilling games. So in this game, it is Dubov who has white pieces and Niemann is black. So Niemann is actually down a pawn here, but he has something over this. This rook can also get active, this queen also, and the most active piece in white's position, the knight. So that's why this knight is here, to try to eliminate it. And if bishop takes e5, then that's a problem, because this will be hanging, then this will be hanging. So now what to do? So Dubov actually played the move knight d5. He's like, I want to exchange the knight and centralize my queen. Then in this position it may seem, but wait, can Niemann just not play knight takes e6 and win the pawn back? No, not so easy. Dubov had actually seen further. So b takes c6, queen takes c6, and then there is this move queen d4, creating this lethal battery of queen and bishop, and Niemann's king side would be extremely weak. So that was the plan of Dubov behind playing knight d5 and queen takes d5. So Niemann played bishop b8. He's like, let me go back. Then Dubov played queen e4. So in this position, Niemann thought that, all right, now let me just take it, because the bishop is not on d6. So after taking, there will not be the battery, because the rook is covering the square. But Dubov had seen further, and knight takes e6 is actually, so of course the position is already difficult, but he can try to play something like f5 or something, and the position remains so not completely lost for him. In blitz he can fight, but knight takes e6, the big blunder. B takes e6. Of course, in this position, rook takes e6. There is queen e8 mate. So Niemann played queen takes e6. There is no queen d4, but there is something even more lethal, that is rook ac1, and Niemann resigned in this position. The queen sacrificed by Dubov, because queen takes e4, rook takes e8, the g7 square is covered by the bishop, and if rook d8, then rook takes d8 is coming. So yeah, this was actually a nice comeback victory by Dubov. He was not phased by those 3 losses in a row, and then he kept his focus. Actually, with this really nice calculation, he actually took back the lead. So the game 16 is over, 2 more games are left, and Dubov is actually once again leading, but just by the thin margin of 1 point. Now let's go for game 17. So in this game, Niemann is white, Dubov is black. This endgame seems actually about equal, but Dubov has actually one big weakness in his position, that is the d4 isolated pawn, and Niemann in this position skillfully actually took advantage of that, and slowly how he planned about that weakness is something that we all should actually watch and learn. So he played rook e4. He's like, let's centralize the rook and then put pressure on this pawn. But at this point, it just seems like, all right, this knight is defending this rook is defending it. What is he going to do? So Dubov in this position played g5. Now Niemann played knight e5, centralizing the knight as well. There can be knight c6 ideas, maybe putting pressure on this, but still it is not clear. What about this? So Dubov played rook d6. He's like, okay, I'll just stop this. And then Niemann played the move knight f3. Now slowly but steadily, Dubov recognized that, wait, what? Niemann has a very simple plan: king d3 and knight takes d4. See what he did from the initial position. He brought the rook here, he brought the knight here, and he brought the king here. He recognized the biggest weakness. He just needs to increase the number of attackers. This king is cut off. So if he increases the attackers, Dubov won't be able to do much. And he really skillfully executed that plan. Then Dubov recognized that, okay, now this pawn is gone, let me sacrifice it. Then he actually made another blunder in a tough position actually. Knight e7, then knight takes g5. The second pawn is gone. This pawn is also weak. Of course, the key point being that this is not possible because of this. And then now the knight actually got trapped because knight a1 has king b2. And Niemann struck back on game 17. So now the score is actually equal after 17 games. The final game is left and the score is equal. So what a thrilling match so far. And let's see what happens in the final game. So Dubov actually has white pieces and Niemann is black. So Niemann's knights are quite active and putting pressure on these pawns. Dubov's knight is also putting pressure on this pawn. So, and this bishop is by the way also under attack. So Dubov played bishop c4. His idea is, okay, you exchange this, I'll exchange. You take this, knight takes a3. And since I have this pass pawn, I might do something. But since this king is here, not much would happen, and it should just end in a draw without much difficulty. So knight takes e4, b takes e4, this, knight c3 or something, and then eventually these pawns will get exchanged with these pawns. The king will also get here. It should be an easy draw. But Niemann actually played knight b1. He's like, I am going to defend this pawn and then I'm attacking this pawn. But in this position, the problem is Dubov can play b4. Now suddenly the sneaky bishop defends that pawn. Then in this position, knight d2 was played by Niemann, Now Dubov should have played bishop d5, keeping this defended, threatening to push this pass pawn, and this pawn is under attack, and Niemann would be in huge trouble actually. But it's a blitz game, time is less, so we can understand that Dubov or Niemann, they both won't be playing the best moves. So knight takes a3 was played. Now we have reached this position. So in a classical game, it should not be too difficult for a strong player to draw this from black. But it's a blitz game and there is pressure. There is this pass pawn, the knight is here, maybe the king can get deflected towards the pass pawn and then the king can get here or the knight can get here, this pawns might fall. So this is really unpleasant position for black to be in. But Niemann defended actually. So let's see. So he brought the king. He's bringing the knight back. And then king e6, king d5, knight b8. Of course, Dubov did not blunder the knight because you would promote. Then king c5, f6, not allowing that king to go ahead. Then knight b3 check was played. King c6, then knight b4, king captures, king d5. Dubov is down a pawn, but he is pushing for the win because king e6 and he can try to go for this pawn. Now, in this position, so Niemann should have played knight d7, and if this, then king c7, king f7, then he can have ideas at times of g5 and then knight e5 check type of stuff, and it should be a draw. But he played the move g5, and Dubov actually at the clutchiest moment of the match, so he played a brilliant move in this position. He played the move g4. It's, he's down a pawn and he's sacrificing another pawn to create the pass pawn. He recognized that he will be down 2 pawns, but Niemann's king and knight, they are too far. So it will be too much for him to defend. Now, with perfect defense, Niemann can still hold this to a draw, but in a blitz game, this is close to an impossible task. So what he had to do was g takes h4, g takes h5, h3, deflect that knight, then get his knight in this position through here. So say for example, if in this position h6 is played, then he can play knight e5, a really nice move. So if knight takes e5, then there is h2, and if h7 gets played, then the knight actually gets to f7, and then the point in this position is that if king e6 gets played, then there is this move h2, deflecting the knight, and then knight g5 check, and then knight takes h7. I mean, it's so complicated, and it's we can understand that in such a complications how Niemann actually faltered and he blundered. So he played h takes e4, and now Dubov is winning. So he pushed the pass pawn, knight d7, then Dubov brought the king to e6. He knows that if Niemann starts pushing any of these pass pawns, this knight can handle it. So knight e5 was played. Then in this position he took the pawn, knight f3 was played. He is not going to exchange the knight and let Niemann promote. He played knight e2, and then in this position Niemann lost on time. But he's anyway losing because this knight actually can't stop this pass pawn. So what a thrilling end of the thrilling match. Kudos to both players for putting up such a tough fight and giving us such an entertaining match. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.